But I didn't have those feelings because I had already figured out that the people who were fighting us were defending their own country. They were fighting back against an army that had no business being there. I had already figured out in those days, and I was already starting to vocalize it, that the war was wrong and that we should not have come there and we shouldn't be there anymore. And that every single person who was dying in this war, Iraqi, American, everybody else, that it was a waste, that it was a crime. And so I didn't have feelings of wanting revenge. It just gave me that sick, hollow, empty feeling inside of me. And I, very quickly was basically, I was just obsessed with getting out of there alive and with helping my friends get out of there alive. And
so that's Clifton Hicks from Eyes Left podcast. He's an Iraq vet, and he was talking about how he eventually managed to get a dishonorable discharge from the U.S. Army after he realized what they were doing in Iraq. Now, I realize this is about Afghanistan, what I'm about to talk about now, but it applies the same to Afghanistan. It applies to any U.S. imperialist war, which is on lies, which Afghanistan was, which Iraq was, which pretty much every single war is on. And it's also to fight wars for oil, for resources, for oligarchs. It's got nothing to do with, it's, as Smedley Butler said, General Smedley Butler said, war is a racket. Anyway, now I'm going to talk about the recent revelations about Afghanistan. Hi, friends. You've probably seen some revelations online. One is in the Washington Post. I'm going to talk about the Washington Post and Jeff Bezos shortly, and how that's a little suspect that the Washington Post is making these revelations, since they're always supporting the military-industrial complex and they have close connections to the CIA. But the publication Monday by the Washington Post of interviews with senior U.S. officials and military commanders on the near 2 decades-old U.S. war in Afghanistan has provided a damning indictment of both the criminality and abject failure and imperialist intervention conducted on the basis of lies. Well, pretty much, I don't know if there's any war. I think most wars are, we could probably safely say, are either conducted on lies and are usually for oligarchs and, stealing resources and all of that. So it's not surprising that the Afghanistan war was done on lies and how they kept that lie going. If you listen to Eyes Left podcast by the co-producer of the Empire Files, Mike Preisner, and his friend Spencer Rapone, who is he's an Afghanistan vet, and Mike Preisner is a Iraq vet. They both had talked about the Afghanistan situation quite a few months ago, and I did post a little video of an excerpt of that podcast episode, and you can find that if you look in Afghanistan and U.S. imperialism, the playlist I have. Do check that out, because for a very long time, generals in Afghanistan have known that, the Taliban has been gradually, basically they control most of Afghanistan, and generals have been sort of well aware that they've been losing that battle over Afghanistan, and the US don't want to leave, and that's one of the reasons the Taliban won't do any sort of deal. The US want to leave 2 US bases in Afghanistan, and the Taliban don't want that to be the case. So, and of course, any governments that they've had in Afghanistan are completely US puppets, unsurprisingly. Anyway, so the Post obtained the raw interviews after a 3-year Freedom of Information court battle. While initially they were not secret, the Obama administration moved to classify the documents after the newspaper sought to obtain them. The interviews were conducted between 2014 and 2018 in the Lessons Learned project, initiated by the Office of Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. The project was designed to review the failures of the Afghanistan intervention with the aim of preventing their repetition the next time U.S. imperialism seeks to carry out an illegal invasion and occupation of an oppressed country. SIGAR's director, John Sopko, freely admitted to the Post that the interviews provided irrefutable evidence that, quote, the American people have been constantly lied to, end quote, about the war in Afghanistan. By the way, I'm reading from the World Socialist Web site, www.ws.org. So check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the information section. So what emerges from these interviews conducted with more than 400 U.S. military officers, special forces operatives, officials from the U.S. Agency for International Development, that's USAID, and senior advisors to both U.S. commanders in Afghanistan and the White House, is an overriding sense of failure tinged with bitterness and cynicism. Those who participated had no expectation that their words would be made public. Well, I don't know about that. Anyway, it's an interesting read, so please check it out. You can check out the Washington Post too. This is always interesting, I find, when a revelation about U.S. imperialism happens, because that's something the mainstream media doesn't do, and that's something that the Jeff Bezos, who's one of the richest men in the world, he's got, I think, about $140 billion, and he owns Amazon, and he's trying to get into the health insurance industry, all sorts of things. He's got his finger in a lot of pies, and one of the organizations he's closely affiliated with is the CIA. They actually did a major deal with the CIA. The Washington Post's owner, Jeff Bezos, is the founder and CEO of Amazon, which recently, and this is back about a year or so ago, which recently landed a $600 million contract with the CIA. So that's a big deal for Jeff Bezos. And the thing is that Jeff Bezos recently lost a $10 billion with a B, dollar contract with the Pentagon to Microsoft. And they've decided that Donald Trump, the US president, has to blame for that. And Jeff Bezos filed a legal claim recently to protest interference in the Department of Defense's decision. I think now this is where it gets messy. The Washington Post, of course, and other mainstream media outlets have been attacking Donald Trump, not because he's a warmonger, which he is, but because they don't feel that he's good enough to be ahead of the U.S. empire, basically. He's too crass and unpredictable. They can't really manipulate him probably as much as they'd like to, but he's doing a great job continuing on these wars and doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex and the CIA and all of that. But obviously Jeff Bezos is not... Jeff Bezos is his various... the Washington Post has been attacking Donald Trump, just like most other mainstream media outlets. And of course, this is one way, this losing of this $10 billion contract that Amazon lost to Microsoft is one way of Donald Trump getting back at Jeff Bezos for his relentless attacks on Donald Trump. Does Donald Trump deserve to be attacked? Yes, of course he does. However, the mainstream media have been doing this ridiculous Russiagate thing, which is a nothing burger. It's been proven to be a nothing burger. And there's so many things you could get Donald Trump on, and if they were actually journalists, if these papers were actually doing journalism, there'd be so much they could get Donald Trump on. There'd be so much they could have gotten Barack Obama on. There could have been so much they gotten Hillary Clinton on. But they're not interested in doing journalism. They're interested in getting advertising, and they're interested in propping up the military-industrial complex and the national security state, and they're all just propaganda arms of the U.S. empire, basically. So Jeff Bezos is just angry because Donald Trump has gotten a bit of gotten back at him for any negative press that Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post have done towards. So Jeff Bezos is going to try and prosecute Donald Trump for interfering with his business ventures. So anyway, $10 billion Pentagon contract is a big one. I'll read you a little bit about that loss of the contract, because that hideous thing that they're actually doing with the Pentagon. So Jeff Bezos' company filed a legal claim on, this is dated November 23rd on Vox.com. I'm not recommending Vox.com. This is just something I came across, and I was aware of this happening at the time. So to protest interference in the Department of Defense's decision. It said Amazon on Friday, this is in November, filed a legal challenge to the Department of Defense surprise decision to award a hard-fought $10 billion cloud computing contract to Microsoft last month and noted the Court of Federal Claims that it plans to use 2 videos of Donald Trump's comments about the deal to make a case of interference. The legal protest was filed under seal to protect trade secrets, but Amazon previously announced that it believed there was, quote, political influence, end quote, and quote, unmistakable bias, end quote, involved in the decision. Quote, we believe it's critical for our country, yada, 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 but they talk about the JEDI, J-E-D-I, which is what this contract is about. And I invite you to look up JEDI, this project they're doing with, it's more surveillance. I remember, if I recall correctly, and I'm sorry I haven't looked that up recently, what JEDI is about, I've forgotten, but I just remember it was pretty appalling. And I'll leave a link when I find some information about that project, which now Microsoft is doing. So anyway, that's Jeff Bezos is angry with Donald Trump, and so because this has been posted in the this recent revelation about 3 administrations lying about the Afghanistan War and what's going on there, this is not surprising. It's surprising in some ways because Washington Post is probably one way to stick it to Donald Trump too, including him in that. But then on the other hand, it could be the CIA asking Jeff Bezos to start talking about this so that they can withdraw troops from Afghanistan and focus on China and Russia. I don't know. I always, when these sort of things happen, one must be skeptical and suspicious that why would Jeff Bezos, who is completely thick as thieves with the CIA, who go around the world creating the circumstances for regime change and overthrowing democratically elected governments and so forth. So if he's so thick as thieves with the CIA, why would he want to release this information? So one has to think about reasons why Jeff Bezos might decide for the Washington Post to do this. Because, as I say, the mainstream media is not about revealing the truth about U.S. empire. They're a propaganda arm of U.S. empire. So I wonder if this is just another way to stick it to Donald Trump because he sabotaged the deal that Jeff Bezos had with the Department of Defense, and he lost that $10 billion contract and Donald Trump was angry with him because he was constantly promoting, oftentimes I think, rubbish about Donald Trump and Russiagate, which all mainstream media outlets have been doing. There's so many things they could get him on and talk about that's real, but no, they have to do that. And I'm not going to go into that. You can read The Grey Zone and Aaron Maté from The Grey Zone. He's done numerous articles, and I think he even won an award for his reporting about Russiagate. So please look into that. But just to know, that was a big nothing burger. So if you want to read the Washington Post article about this, it's titled, Confidential Documents Reveal U.S. Officials Failed to Tell the Truth About the War in Afghanistan. So the Sydney Morning Herald says the White House administrations misled the public about failures in the Afghanistan War, often suggesting success where it didn't exist, according to thousands of pages of documents obtained by the Washington Post. The documents reveal deep frustrations about America's conduct on the Afghanistan War, including the ever-changing U.S. strategy, the struggles to develop an effective Afghan fighting force, and persistent failures to defeat the Taliban and combat corruption throughout the government. Quote, we were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing, end quote. Douglas Lute, a three-star Army general who served as the White House Afghan war czar during the Bush and Obama administrations, told government interviewers in 2015. Now, I don't know why, if they never really wanted this to get out, why they would interview all these people about this. I guess if they wanted to change the narrative, they can pull out these interviews. I guess, if you want to focus your imperialist war efforts somewhere else, you can use that to change public opinion so that then you can go and focus military efforts on, say, China and Russia, which is China has become a big target now because it's economically threatening the US, and they're only okay with capitalism when they're the ones that are winning. They don't like the competition in capitalism unless they're the ones that are getting ahead. And China is a great economic power now. So, I mean, that could be what it's about. Or, I don't know. It's interesting. Or it could be just sticking it to Donald Trump. Who knows? But it's a bit of a grenade just before these elections. But I don't expect to hear much from other mainstream media outlets because they're all okay with war and they're just propaganda arms of the military-industrial complex, the national security state. But anyway, I'll leave these links to these articles. I won't read any more of it. You can check them out yourself. And but it shouldn't be any surprise that war going on so long and the lies that there's been constant lying about that. And I do invite you to join Eyes Left podcast. They're very busy, Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone. So there haven't been a whole lot of episodes come out, but there is 2 or 3 about Afghanistan. One of them is Clifton Hicks, who is a Afghanistan vet, and he talks about some of the atrocities that he saw there. One where they were coming into, I think this was Afghanistan, they were coming into a town, is Abu Ghraib in Afghanistan or Iraq? I'm so sorry. But anyway, they were coming into Abu Ghraib, and he said...
We lived on the tanks for about a month or 2. I don't remember. This was a point where, like I said, things got rough, people started to freak out. And it was a little too real, So we lived on the tanks at this point. Eventually they told us that we were outside of this town called Abu Ghraib. And we'd heard of the prison, but we didn't know it was also a town. And apparently this town was halfway between Fallujah and Baghdad. We didn't know any of this at the time. I didn't know any of this until in later years. I looked it all up and looked on maps and researched where we were. At the time, none of us knew where we were. I mean, I guess the officers and stuff knew, but none of us knew. None of the enlisted guys knew where the hell we were.
There's a good chance they didn't know either, Cliff. Just wondering.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so they didn't know. Nobody knew where the hell we were. And then so they told us that we were going into this town, and it was one of the other troops in the squadron was going to, usually what would happen, a lot of times we did this in smaller areas, one troop would cordon off a town or a village or a neighborhood or a few city blocks in Baghdad, and another troop would go in and do the raiding and knocking down doors, walls, and whatever was supposed to happen, with the idea that the attacking troop would do the main killing and the fighting and flush everybody out. And when they fled, they would encounter the other troops' vehicles at roadblocks and OPs and ambush points, and they would get either killed or captured trying to flee. So that's what we did here. One of the other troops cordoned off, I guess, the whole town of Abu Ghraib, while my troop, C Troop, Comanche Troop, went in. And they called it a recon in force. We were basically just going to go, and because this was an area where I believe it was the 1st Cavalry Division had been pushed out, and there had been no coalition troops there for weeks. So they said that, and then they also said explicitly, I wrote this down in my little notebook, that there were no friendlies in the area. There were no coalition forces, and there were no civilians in the area. They said that all the civilians had already fled and been evacuated, and if we saw anybody, to just go ahead and shoot them. Is that we went in, and the first few times we went into the town, I was down in the driver's hole in the tank, all buttoned up, and nobody on my tank ever did any shooting because we didn't see anybody. It was just devastated, deserted, empty city. I had never seen anything like it, and never have seen anything like it. This whole town was completely destroyed. It looked like Stalingrad, the old pictures that I'd seen. There was hardly anything left standing. Every single structure was full of holes. All the windows had burn damage, where the fire had come out of the windows. There was rubble everywhere. There was more corpses laying around, dead people, dead dogs. I even saw a dead horse or 2. It was just devastated. And so this is at a point where I really started to get sick of what I was doing. It was pretty disgusting. And I got news that several of my friends had been killed in the uprising in different units. And I was really not having it. I was really upset. about the whole situation. And this comes on the heels of when we got the news in Kuwait that we were going back. That's when, people started really grumbling. And I mentioned to you guys the near mutiny that that I claim almost happened in my unit. Well, all that started back in Kuwait. But anyhow, you're asking about the free fire stuff. But here's what happened. I stopped talking out there.
He said that they saw about 600 to 800 people laying on the ground, including all the animals. They'd all been killed. They'd all been gunned down or bombed, animals and everything. So they'd actually gone in and had a free fire zone time in this village as a collective punishment for something that had happened, according to Clifton Hicks. He saw it with his own eyes, and that's not unusual, this free firing that happens. This country it's been absolutely destroyed by U.S. empire, just as Iraq has been. And so I invite you to check those episodes on Eyes Left podcast and just listen to first-hand accounts by veterans, because that's the major focus of Eyes Left podcast. There you get the real deal about what was happening in Afghanistan, not the nonsense that the mainstream media tell you, or even some of these people that are being interviewed might tell you. You actually get it from on the ground soldiers. Anyway, so there we go. That's all I really want to say. I'm not going to talk much about the contents of the interviews of these various military officials on their frustrations and all of that. You can read about that. So anyway, thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. You can please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive notifications when I drop a video. Please click the like button if you like the content. And also check out the recent interview with Chris Hedges and Mike Preisner and Abby Martin about Abby Martin's film, Gaza Fights for Freedom. A really great film that everybody should watch and share. You can find it on Vimeo online. Please check out this interview with Chris Hedges on Contact with them both. And these are two journalists, filmmakers that everybody should support. Okay, so thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.